to this special event in celebration of Agustin Barrios Mangare's life and art, which luckily for us he chose to express so well on the guitar. His music is performed more and more on the concert stage wherever the classical guitar is now performed. But it was not always so. As with so many dedicated artists, musicians, the appreciation of Barrios' efforts came some 30 to 40 years after his death, although there were those within his lifetime who valued and supported his art. This scenario is not that unusual, unfortunately. One person who also received recognition all too late that comes to mind is the great composer Franz Peter Schubert, who was also discovered some 40 to 50 years after he had died. But in order to get a viewpoint on how things were in Barrios' time, let us go back 100 years or so to a time and place where there was no TV and no radio. Although there may have been electricity, let's go to a small town in a small country in South America, to Paraguay, where the working day were long hours and relaxation and entertainment was reserved for days off. Those times represented not just a time of relaxation, but a time of feeding the soul. Back then, music was an event. And if we go back only 50 years earlier than that, music was reserved for the elite. And unless you attended church on Sundays where it was heard in a religious context, you didn't have access to music at all. If you had enough money and liked music, then you hired musicians, much like you hired servants, and they performed the music for you and your guests. With the advent of the guitar, music was finally at the fingertips of the common folk. Unlike other affordable folk instruments like flutes and drums, the guitar offered to the musician the ability to perform both melody and harmony. A complete miniature orchestra was accessible in the right hands. Think about it. How many common folk could afford a piano or organ? It became the guitar, the perfect instrument of choice for Barrios. It was in this environment and circumstances that Agustin Barrios Mangare was born in 1885. When he heard and found the guitar in his hands at the age of 7, it would not be the center of his life for his remaining days. The music that was available to Barrios was fairly limited. The modern works of the time was not readily heard in the countries of South America. It is interesting to compare the programs of Andres Segovia with that of Barrios. At one point in 1920, they were both performing in Montevideo, although they did not meet at the time. They would not meet until 1 year later in Buenos Aires. Segovia performed at that time pieces by Albinez, Tárrega, Sor, Bach, Handel, Schumann, and Chopin. Barrios, on the other hand, had on his program some music by the classical composers Beethoven, Chopin, and Mendelssohn, but for the most part, his programs included original music composed by himself, as well as music by other South American composers. Because of the shortage of published music and the great creative urge that Barrios had, it was very understandable that he turned to composing his own music more and more. It was from the years 1918 to 1928 that Barrios was to compose most of his masterpieces, and he confided that during that time he was more and more interested in composing. Much of the inspiration for his music came from the common music of the people, what was called popular folkloric, except that Barrios became a very skilled composer with a natural talent that came through on the guitar, an instrument not easy to compose for. A lot of the music that Barrios composed has been lost due to his own neglect of writing out the manuscripts. There are many stories of Barrios friends urging him again and again to write out the beautiful melodies that he played to save for posterity. There is a story of he being locked in a room and not let out until a certain amount of the music was put onto paper. We don't know the first piece of music that Barrios composed, but the earliest piece of music traced to him is titled Abri la puerta mi chine, which roughly translated means, "Open the door, my country girl." It is dated December 25th, 1905, and may have been a Christmas gift to someone.
At this time, I have the pleasure of introducing Tom Lysett, who will perform for us the earliest known piece of music